friends. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen. This is my booktube. And if you notice that I sound a little rough and I maybe look a little rough, it's because I've been sick with a cold for pretty much a week now. So I'm not really feeling my best, but I did want to get a video out this weekend still. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a pretty quick April/May reading wrap up because I didn't do a reading wrap up last month and it is now June. So it's time to talk about what I read in May. And because talking makes me cough more, we're going to try to get through this as quickly and efficiently as possible. So really no more introduction going on. We're just going to dive right in and talk about the books that I read in April. And interestingly enough, the order that I read these books in is also the ranking order from lowest rank to highest rank. So we're just going to go through them in the order that I read them and talk about them a bit. So the first book that I finished in April was The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkauf. I think that's how you say it. It seems like a pretty German name. But this book was a reread for me. It was my workbook club's pick for the month of April. And so I had read it before and I did enjoy it. I thought it was a pretty decent thriller, even though I did guess quite a few of the twists pretty early on. So that's why I gave it a 3.5. I just feel like I can't give a thriller a 4-star or higher if I guessed every twist in the book. It just doesn't feel right to me, you know? So I gave it a 3.5, still a pretty solid rating. And when I say I guessed all the twists, I mean I guessed all the twists the first time I read it, not this time. I mean, obviously I would know what the twists were because this is the second time I read the book. So this book centers around our main character whose name is Wiley Lark, and she is a true crime writer, and she is on location doing research and writing a new true crime book about a family that was murdered in their homes in, I believe, the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. I can't quite remember exactly the year that it takes place, but it's somewhere in that time range. And while she's at this farmhouse in Iowa, there is a snowstorm that comes through and she hears a car crash outside of the home that she's staying in. And when she goes out to investigate, she finds an injured woman and a small child. She takes the child into the house and then she goes back to try to help the woman, and when she gets back, the woman is gone. So this leads to a lot of questions for Wiley, naturally. And we slowly find out who these two people are while the story unfolds. So this story is told in two perspectives. It's a past and a present perspective. And while we are following along with Wiley as she is trying to figure out who this child is, why they crashed this truck in the middle of a snowstorm, why the woman that was with the child left before she could get back to them, and why would she leave in the first place when she had an injured child with her. And then at the same time, we are also hearing about the true crime story that Wiley is writing about leading up to the murders that occurred. So it's a very interesting kind of back and forth between the two, and it's very creepy, it's very mysterious, and I did really enjoy this book the first time that I read it and the second time that I read it. But like I said, since I did guess pretty much all of the twists when I read the first book, I just felt like a 4-star was a little too high of praise because other thrillers that I've rated 4 stars have really gotten me with the twists before. But nonetheless, this is still a really good thriller. I still really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to pretty much anyone that's into true crime, thrillers, things like that. Then after that book, I read another thriller. This one was by Ruth Ware, and it's her newest book called 0 Days. Now, if you peruse on my Goodreads profile or my StoryGraph profile for any amount of time, you will see that one of my top authors is Ruth Ware. I think I've pretty much read every book that she's written thus far. There may be 2 that I haven't read yet, and I think I have one of them on my shelf actually. Yeah, I have The Death of Mrs. Westway on my shelf that I have not read yet, but aside from that one, I've read pretty much every Ruth Ware book that there is. And this one is no exception. I saw it come up through my library, so I borrowed it, and here we are. So 0 Days focuses on a couple who hack into businesses and corporations to stress test their security systems. It's like a paid thing that they freelance for. The wife does the physical break-in parts, and the husband does the hacking parts. So basically what they do is they try to infiltrate these businesses as if they were criminals trying to steal their data or input a virus into the computer system, things like that. And they basically go about it like real hackers would and try their best not to get caught by security. At the end of their assignments, whether they're caught by the security team or not, they produce a report that they give to the higher ups in the company to tell them what all they were able to get away with and where there are gaps in their security systems. It's a very interesting concept I had never heard of. They call it pen testing. I had never heard of that before. So I thought that was an interesting concept for a book like this. It's definitely different than anything else that Ruth Ware has done in prior books before, which I think is a hallmark of Ruth Ware. She's a pretty solid thriller writer and her plots are pretty interesting. I've noticed other thriller writers are pretty formulaic in the way that they write their thrillers, in that the settings might change slightly, but the storylines are kind of similar. Whereas in Ruth Ware books, she does a really good job of making each book that she writes pretty unique in the plot lines and the overall story. So we have this hacking couple, right? We have this hacking couple, and after they finish one of the jobs that they're on, the wife actually gets caught by police and taken into police custody and questioned. So she is out super late because of that, and by the time she actually gets home, she's just ready to basically fall into bed. But she notices that something is off pretty much as soon as she walks in the house, and to her horror realizes that while she was being detained at the police station, someone has broken into their house and murdered her husband, Gabe. And since she is in shock, it takes her, I think, about like 30 minutes or so to call the police. And once they show up, she is immediately suspect number one. At first, she is willing to cooperate with the police to try to figure out what happened to Gabe. But then it soon becomes abundantly clear that she is suspect number one and they are entirely focused on her and not looking for anyone else that could have murdered Gabe. And so she goes on the run throughout the UK, trying to evade the police while at the same time trying to figure out who actually murdered her husband. And like I said, I thought this was a really cool thriller premise. It all takes place in the UK, so there's a lot of like train hopping and stuff like that. I ended up giving this book a 3.75 because though I did guess a big twist in this book, there were other twists that I did not see coming, so it got ranked a little bit higher than the overnight guest for that reason. But overall, I thought it was a really good thriller. I really enjoyed it. It had me on the edge of my seat. I was very worried about what was going to happen to our main character throughout most of the book. The one complaint that I do have is that I don't know if she just has like ride or die people in her life that just believe everything that she says, but from my point of view, everyone that helped her in the book was far too ready and willing to help her evade the law. And like, I get that they knew that she was innocent, that they knew that she did not murder her husband, but like, I don't know, I just feel like I would have a little bit of pause even if like one of my best friends called me and asked me to help them become a fugitive. I think I would have a few more questions than these people did in this book. So that was another thing in this book that I was like, I don't know about that part. But overall, I still really enjoyed the book. So 3.75 was where I ended up landing on the rating for that one. And those were the only two books that I finished in April. I did have several that I rolled over into May that I was about like halfway through or more than that I ended up finishing in May. So we'll go ahead and talk about the books that I finished in May now. So we have 3 more books. The first one that I finished, which you would have seen if you had been following along with any of my reading vlogs and things like that, is Throne of Glass. I finally finished Throne of Glass, the first book in the series, and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Pretty much the whole time it was giving me Hunger Games vibes. Not exactly, but close enough to where it did remind me of Hunger Games. And as you would have seen in the reading vlogs that I did about this book, the main villain, whose name is Cain, the whole time I just kept calling him Cato because he just reminded me of Cato from the Hunger Games. Yeah, so it's not like a direct ripoff, but there are similar themes where there's this competition between all of these, they call them champions in this book, but similar to the tributes in Hunger Games, are all competing to become the king's champion. And that's pretty much where the similarities stop, because when these people are eliminated from the competition, they don't necessarily die. Some of them do die. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of death in this book. but they do have the opportunity to walk away from this competition. It's not like a guaranteed death sentence if they don't perform well. And they do have like actual trials that they're doing, tests of like archery skill, combat skills, things like that. So when I say it reminds me of the Hunger Games, don't get me wrong and think that I'm saying that it's like a blatant ripoff of it. It's not. It just has similar themes that made me think of that series because I really like that series. And so, as you would assume, I also really liked this book. I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was very action-packed and fun. There were some funny lines. The main character is quite sarcastic, so I also enjoyed that. And yeah, now I think about 70 pages into Crown of Midnight, and we're getting into what I think is more of the meat of the main story that is going to set up the rest of the series. From what I understand from my friends that have already read Throne of Glass, that first book really just sets the groundwork for everything that happens in the next 6 or 7 books. So yeah, I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. And I do think that this series will probably be the Sarah J. Maas series that I like the most, just because I have heard this series compared to A Court of Wings and Ruin, which is my favorite of the ACOTAR books. I know most people really like A Court of Mist and Fury, and I do really like that one too, but A Court of Wings and Ruin just has that like espionage and the war tactics that I really enjoy in a fantasy book, and it's so action-packed that that book is my favorite of the series. So when I heard that this series is similar to that book in that regard, I was very excited, and so far I am seeing that. There is a bit of romance in it, but it's not like the most forefront thing that's happening in the series. There's a bit of a love triangle, there's some flirting going on, but it's all pretty tame compared to A Court of Thorns and Roses. But yeah, I'm excited to keep on reading in this series with Crown of Midnight, and best believe that I will be taking you guys along on the entire adventure throughout that series. Alright, and then the last 2 books that I read in the month of May are actually related to one another. For May, my workbook club ended up picking Part of Your World as the read for last month, and I'm not gonna lie, I was in a bit of a reading slump going into May. That's why I only read 2 books in April. I just did not have the motivation to really read that much. I was having some like issues at work where I was just really busy and really stressed out all the time, so I didn't have time to listen to audiobooks at work like I normally would. And then because I was so busy and stressed out at work, by the time I got home, I didn't want to read anything. I just wanted to decompress and veg out on my couch. So May, we got a little bit better with that. We would have had more books to talk about if I didn't get sick in the last week of May. I had full intentions of finishing at least like 1 or 2 more books, but you know, things happen and I got a cold, and I pretty much spent all of my free time last week sleeping, because that's all I could really do. And as you can tell from my voice, I'm still not all the way better, but at least I can do some more reading so that I can hopefully read some more books in June. But yes, so we read Part of Your World for my work's book club, and I really enjoyed this book. This book was probably one of the best romances that I've ever read. Abby Jimenez does a rom-com book so well. I feel like I see a lot of romance books that are touted as rom-coms, but they're not funny. Like, the key component of a rom-com is that it's funny. And I have not had other romance books make me laugh out loud quite like Abby Jimenez's books have. Her characters are really funny, quick-witted, sarcastic, and the situational comedy in these books is also really funny. Even if it's a bit cliche, it's kind of self-aware. So all of the cliche things are happening to like jaded women who are just like, of course this is gonna happen. Of course this is gonna be like a Hallmark movie or whatever. So I just think that that's a really funny way to do a romance like this. So Part of Your World is centered around Alexis Montgomery, I believe is her last name, and she is part of this really well-respected medical family who have a lot of prestige in the medical world, and specifically at the hospital that she works at in Minneapolis, I think it is. And the book opens up with Alexis getting her car stuck in a ditch in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, where she has to be rescued and towed out by a handsome man. obviously. And that is where our romance begins. So the main conflict of the book centers around how he is a country boy from this teeny tiny town in Iowa, and she is this big city surgeon. I put big city in quotes because I just thought it was funny that every time that they talked about how she's a city girl and he's a country boy, I had to remind myself that the big city that they're talking about is Minneapolis, Minnesota, not even like Chicago or something. So that just also made me laugh because like I live in Dallas, so to me, Minneapolis isn't like a big city, but I know that if you're in Minnesota or like in the Midwest, that is one of the big cities. So that's just something that made me laugh about this book. But yeah, she's like this hotshot ER doctor, and she has a family legacy to uphold in Minneapolis. And he is a small town guy, but he is also the mayor of the town, and he is pretty much the backbone of his small town. And so that's why on the cover you can see they live in two completely different worlds. And another thing about them is that Alexis is 10 years older than our love interest Daniel. And that is also something that plays on her mind throughout the book, even though he's like, I don't care. I don't care that you're 10 years older than me. I don't care about anything else. I just want to be with you, which I think is a very sweet sentiment. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5. And the reason why I gave it a 4.5 and not higher is because though I really, really enjoyed this book, I felt that it wasn't a perfect romance for me specifically. And I knew that she had other books. And so I wanted to give myself a little wiggle room to go up for the other books or go down and still be in the 4-star range. So 4.5 felt like a good sitting place for that book. As with any of these ratings, I don't typically go back and change them, but I do like to rate books by the same author relative to each other. So if I read more books by this author and this book is better than other ones, I could bump it up a little bit, but as of right now it's sitting at a 4.5 because I've only read 2 books by this author. And that kind of leads us into the last book that I read in May, which is Yours Truly, also by Abby Jimenez. And this book focuses on Brianna, who we meet in the first book because she is Alexis's best friend. So this book and then the third book, Just for the Summer, are part of a series with Part of Your World, but it's a series kind of like the Brown Sisters series. If anyone is familiar with that series by Talia Hibbert, it's kind of like that one where it's technically a series, but each book focuses on a different character within the universe that the author has created. So you could read them out of order and be okay. The only thing you're risking spoiling is that characters from other books end up together, which it's a romance, so that's kind of a given anyway, that they're gonna end up together in the end. But nonetheless, I decided that I wanted to read them in the order that it's intended. So I have finished Yours Truly, and I'm glad that I left some wiggle room because Yours Truly I really, really enjoyed. I ended up giving it a 4.75, and again, this one made me laugh out loud. It was really funny, it was cute, it was charming. The love interest Jacob has such a funny family. His parents literally remind me of Barbara Streisand and Dustin Hoffman in Meet the Fockers. That's the vibe that I got the entire time. And I told my other friends that have also read this book that that's the vibe I got, and they all agree. So I feel like I'm right on par with that assessment. But yes, like I said, this book centers on Brianna. Bri is still living in Minneapolis, and she is working at the same hospital that was introduced in the first book when we meet Alexis. And so now we're just kind of switching gears over to Bri's story. And Bri's love interest is a new doctor that has transferred to the ER from another hospital named Jacob. And they don't get off on the best foot immediately. She low-key actually hates him for like a good chunk of the first part of the book. Nonetheless, she ends up coming around and agreeing to fake date Jacob. So this is a fake dating to real dating kind of trope, and I've always been a sucker for that kind of trope. I don't know why, but movies, TV shows with tropes like that, I eat them up. So this book was no different, and I understand now why Book of the Month awarded this book Book of the Year in 2023. It's a really good romance. It's funny. It's sweet. The two love interests write letters to each other. That's why it's called Yours Truly. And I am a sucker for letter writing, people leaving each other love notes. I'm a sucker for that. So I really loved this book. Now, I did rate it a 4.75 just because Brie kind of got on my nerves towards the end of the book. I'm not gonna lie. When the conflict that puts the relationship to the test shows up, I kind of saw it as like, not a non-issue. I just thought that she was overreacting a little bit, and there were some other plot points towards the end of the book that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I still really loved the book overall, so I couldn't knock it too much for that. So 4.75 is where I felt comfortable leaving it. And that still leaves a little bit of wiggle room for Just for the Summer if I like that one more. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in April and May. I've been coughing a lot throughout this entire video, so hopefully I can edit all of that out. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little reading wrap-up video. I hope it was entertaining for you, even though I barely have a voice. If you did enjoy, go ahead and leave a like down below. Let me know. You should also subscribe while you're down there because I put out new videos every single weekend. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!